All right, well, let's jump in. Jonathan, you ready?
Yes, and excited to be here. Thank you so much for having me back.
You bet. So, again, my name's Gary Trauner. I'm the executive director of Silicon Couloir. I'm doing this from my front porch. Jonathan Schechter is with us. He's on the town council, a member of the town council, an elected official, as well as the executive director of the Schechter Institute, also the founder of 1% for the Tetons, granting institution that's part of Schechter. Jonathan, welcome.
Thank you, Gary. Thank you.
Again, just to set some quick ground rules, Will Stabler from Silicon Couloir is kind of doing the technical work behind the scenes. He'll be looking at questions through the chat function, which is down at the bottom of your screen. Everybody is going to be muted and their video will be off. And again, if you want to ask a question in person instead of via chat, please let Will know in the chat screen. And when we get to it, we'll try and unmute you. We want this to be interactive, but I think there's also a lot of information that we can get from Jonathan at the beginning of this. So we'll start going and we'll just see how it goes from there. So thank you, Jonathan, for coming on board and doing this again. So you did a survey in April of what you got 850 some odd respondents roughly.
Yes, sir.
Trying to determine what the feeling was in our valley as to where things were headed economically. And we got some interesting results, but then you decided to go out in May and resurvey essentially similar questions. And maybe you can just run us through the difference between the results in the span of 30 days or so.
Sure. The big challenge is that because all of the rules have been lost, or just, there are no good rules to follow during this COVID thing. The question was, what might our future be looking like as far as the local economy? So I decided I'd try to crowdsource the answer, drawing inspiration from a book called The Wisdom of the Crowds. And so, as you mentioned, I got about 850 responses to the April survey. And the guess was that we would see about a 40% drop in taxable sales this year. The other interesting thing in hindsight that came out of that April survey was people felt, when I asked about their own personal expenditures, they felt like they would see about, on average, a 14% drop in their personal income and a similar 14% drop in their in their personal expenditures. And obviously the one is just a guess, and the former, but the latter about how are you feeling about your personal income and expenditures, again, it was about a 14% drop. But because the response was so great, I went back out again in May, as you indicated, and asked the same questions. And the short answer is people were more pessimistic. We only got about half as many respondents, 460, but it's still, the demographic profile was very similar in both. And realistically, the answers were pretty well locked in stone after about 150 responses. So to get 3 times or 4 times that many, that was a great, I'm confident that it was reflective of the audience. And it went from about a 40% drop in taxable sales to high 40s was the estimate for the rest of the year. And so people were feeling more pessimistic in that sense. Is it going to prove accurate? I don't know. And I'm not pretending it will. But just as a snapshot of how people are feeling between early April and early May, they became more pessimistic. And the other thing that I thought was really interesting was that they also were indicating greater pessimism around their personal financial situation, that 14% drop in income and expenditures, those both went up to about a 20% drop. So an estimated 20% drop in income, an estimated 20% drop in expenditures. So those were sort of the big high-level takeaways from it.
So, and this is such it's interesting that much can change in 30 days, but this is such a quick moving situation that I think even a lot more has changed probably since you sent the survey out. It turns out that much of the company, including our valley, is reopening, whatever that means. But we're open for business, and tourists are back in town, and the parks, which were closed for an indeterminate amount of time, are open. So you've recently got some information on recent sales tax data, I believe, for April and May. Is that correct?
Yeah, I did, and just I can share that with you. But to touch upon your mention of the parks, Yellowstone. I talked to the superintendent up there, and he's been kind enough to provide me with daily visitation counts for the South Gate, so coming up from Jackson Hole, and the East Gate coming in from Cody over the first 15 days that the park's been open. So it's good through a couple days ago. And the park visitation overall is down about 30%, 30.
Mm-hmm.
It's a bigger drop on the South Gate from the Jackson Hole side than it is from the Cody side. So just as a quick, I'm trying to put together other data, and I'll be putting that into my e-newsletters, but I'm going to try to get stuff on a weekly basis or every other week, because the data that come out on taxable sales and other indicators, which come out on a monthly basis, with something that's moving as quickly as COVID, that just doesn't seem to be a timely enough indicator. So
Right.
to your point on taxable sales, Gary, every month I get a report from the state of Wyoming showing taxable sales. So yesterday, late afternoon, I got a report from the Wyoming Department of Revenue showing the taxable sales that were reported to the state in May. So the way it works is that you've got Gary's donut stand, and so you sold $10,000 worth of donuts in April, say.
That's because I ate most of the other ones, but
Yes, exactly. And so on that $10,000 worth of donuts, you would have collected $600 worth of sales tax. So you would have collected that in April. You would have had to have mailed it into the state by the end of May. And so the report that came out yesterday was the May report, which generally indicates April sales. And
right.
Of course, April was the first month when everything was shut down. And so if it's all right with you, I scrambled to try and, just knowing that this session was going to be going on, I scrambled to put together a few slides to just show what's happened over the last couple of months as far as taxable sales. So if you'd like, I can show this with you.
Yeah, I think that'd be great, because I do have some questions in some of the trends that I've been seeing nationally, and I want to know if they comport with what we're seeing locally as well. So that would be great.
Okay, hang on. Let me just do this and then do this and then do this.
All right, you're up.
Okay, good. So as I mentioned, so the April, what I've got here is the taxable sales collection. So the state of Wyoming has a basic 4% sales tax. And so what this is looking at is the yellow bars are the amount of that 4% that were collected in April and May respectively. And then at the bottom, April and May combined. And the blue was what was collected in April, May, and then April, May combined. And the black X's show the percentage change. So
yellow is 2019 and blue is 2020.
Right. So, and then, so the top X here is showing about a 25% drop between April. So this is roughly representative of March's sales. And the surprising thing, and I don't know if this is just noise, but it was only about a 20% drop in in May, in the report that just came out. And if you combine them together, which is going to give us a little better indication, we're down about 23% between April and May, which is much lower drop than I expected. I was expecting more in the 40, 50% personally, and that's what the survey that I put together showed. So now the question is, let's tear into it a little bit and try and get a little bit deeper and see what's going on. So I took all these sales and I broke them into 4 different categories. The stuff that is tourism related, the stuff that is a blend of tourism and locals, stuff that is purchased just by locals, and then there's sort of the mix of other things. And so tourism would be something like rental cars or lodging, basically stuff that locals aren't going to spend any money on. The blend is going to be stuff like restaurants and retail, and then local things. I'll get into that in just a second. But the interesting thing here is, so tourism was getting, between April and May, got hit pretty hard. The blend didn't. But this is the interesting thing. We actually saw a bump up in locally oriented sales.
So Jonathan, can you go to the next slide? Is that on a slide? I'm sorry. Yeah, this slide hasn't changed.
Oh, really? What do you see on your screen?
I'm looking at the first slide that you showed, the Teton County, Wyoming, 2019 versus 2020. The summary slide.
Okay.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I just want to
no,
make sure.
I have the other one in front of me, so that's what's confusing me.
Oh, okay.
Let me see if I can do something here. Hang on.
There you go.
Okay, let me try and I'll try another way around this, see if I can do it.
But you got it right now. You got it.
Okay, great. So what's interesting about this is there was actually this little bump up in the stuff that I call local sales during the combined April and May. So again, this is reflecting March and April sales. So if you go another level down, try and ask what in the world is going on here. This is a little harder to read, and so maybe I'll just try and take it larger. Hang on.
So I see it. And what you're saying, I think, is that construction and retail held to their own, but everything else actually dropped pretty strongly.
Well, do you see the one that says rental cars, lodging, consumer? Yep. Okay. Yep. So the thing that is really, so yeah, construction didn't really fall during those 2 months, but check this out. That's online shopping. And basically our amount of online shopping in Teton County generating taxable sales, so stuff you're buying from Amazon or from wherever, that basically doubled during the months of April and May, and the reports of April and May, so March and April. And so to the degree that we didn't sink as far as I thought we were going to sink, and as respondents to the survey thought, it's because we spent a whole lot of money, a whole lot more money on online shopping, and then construction sales were also buoyed. But everything else, rental cars, excuse me.
So to your point, while you're talking to that survey, the survey results, if you look at the tourism and the blend, they all look like they're down between 40 and 50%. So they actually jive pretty closely with the sentiment of people in the Valley. And if it wasn't for online shopping increasing by 80% plus, and construction holding its own, we would have actually been in that same situation that the survey respondents said.
Yeah, and the stuff down here, the all other, that's things like you pay sales taxes on your cell phone, you pay sales taxes on utilities.
Right.
It's things like that
which are relatively constant, maybe, or close to it.
Exactly. They're not going to change that much. You're still going to heat your house or light your house or, buy gasoline or things like that. So I thought that was pretty darn interesting. And then I've got one other, and then I've broken it down. And you'll have to tell me, Gary, are these slides changing for you?
It hasn't changed yet. It's still on the, the one with the online shopping and car sales and tourism blend local.
Okay. Then I'll have to, here, we'll do this again. You should see something that says core retail up here.
Yep, now it changed, yep.
Okay, so this is in the, hang on.
While you're doing that, Jonathan, quick question. Someone asked, would 2019 have include Amazon Wyoming sales tax? Because if not, it would make it even a bigger difference. Do you know that or not?
It kicked in 2019, but it hadn't. So Amazon was already in there. So there is a little bit of a, um, there is a little bit of a, as you allude to,
Right.
uh, so it's not a complete apples to apples, but it is
But it did
a,
kick on in 2019 at some point.
yeah. So this was the one that just, so I was looking at all this other retail stuff and what I call core retail. And you can see here, yeah, clothing and miscellaneous and gifts, pretty much everything went into the toilet except gasoline. And that could be very much a function of the price drop that went on, and liquor. So liquor stores were crushing it during the last couple of months. And
So, that so I saw a statistic the other day that was pretty stunning to me, and it had to do with online commerce, e-commerce. And e-commerce has been growing steadily over the last 10 years or so, I think roughly at about 10% per year. And e-commerce, in the statistic that I saw, accounted for about 16% of all retail sales nationally at the beginning of this year, January or December, February. In the last 2 months, it's gone from 16% of sales to 28% of sales. So almost doubled in the span of 2 months during this crisis. If that's the case, how do you see that impacting our valley if that trend stays the way it is, and if the trend that we see in your charts showing that online sales spiked, what does that portend for us going forward, potentially?
I'm going to start with a slight misdirection, but I think you're hitting upon an incredibly important point, particularly given the theme of this talk about where's our economy heading. So the town of Jackson, we're just finishing up our budget, and I think I mentioned this in our last conversation. 75% of the town of Jackson's general revenues come from sales taxes, and another 5% come from our share of the lodging tax. And I'm going to stop sharing the screen now, Gary, so I'm throwing it back to you.
That's great.
So 80% of our revenues are designed come from sales taxes, which is nuts. It might have reflected how Jackson Hole's economy worked in the 20th century when the taxing system was set up, but we are a 21st century community, and there's this wide and growing chasm between what our economy of today is and how we fund ourselves. And that chasm, I think, is also going to swallow up a lot of the way that business is conducted in Jackson Hole. And so what I mean by that is, I think that we were seeing one thing that I'm in the middle of trying to analyze is we are seeing a real slowdown in, even before all the COVID stuff hit, we were seeing a real slowdown in our bricks and mortar commerce and a real growth in other things than our bricks and mortar commerce. And if you make the argument, which I think is not a bad one, that COVID has really put us into a chrysalis. We were a caterpillar, and we've gone into this chrysalis state now where everything is sort of frozen and we're sort of metamorphizing. And the question is, what are we going to emerge into and be? Well, I think one of the things that's going to really speak to what we are, I think this COVID thing, and you were getting at it nationwide just a minute ago, I think it's going to transform or help push the transformation of Jackson Hole's economy away from the traditional retail, tourism, lodging, restaurant kind of thing that we have come to see as dominating our economy, to the kind of stuff that Silicon Couloir has in its membership base. In other words, businesses that are location neutral or that don't necessarily need the large bricks and mortar presence because they have a different kind of customer base. And so again, we're in a chrysalis and I don't know what it's going to look like coming out, but this couple of months of sales tax data combined with observations like the one you just made about the rapid shift toward, or the acceleration toward, more online sales, I think a year from now, 2 years from now, 5 years from now, we are going to have an increasingly bifurcated economy, one that may still be dependent upon tourism and taxable sales for funding local government, but an increasing amount of it will be non-traditional or emerging, or the kind of businesses that Silicon Couloir is really doing a good job in cultivating.
And let's talk, first of all, I want to thank you for that National Geo metaphor that you gave us of caterpillars and chrysalises. That's, I'm going to go back and watch Planet Earth when we're done.
You're welcome.
But let's draw that out a little bit, because I think that's really interesting. I think, you know, it's a phrase that you've used, and I might butcher it, but and you said it. We're really in a 21st century economy with 20th century financial and foundational infrastructure, in a sense.
We're 21st century community with 20th century operating system.
Yeah, and we all know that if we are still trying to use, you know, DOS as an operating system, you're in deep doo-doo. So I think everyone can understand what that means. First of all, I want to make sure if you do have questions, please make sure to put them in the chat. We want this to be interactive, and we'd love to answer things that come to everybody's mind. So please make sure to do so. So let's stretch that out a little bit. If we're looking at businesses that are location neutral in terms of where they can locate, and they want to be someplace that's a desirable place to live and work and play, you know, how does that, where do we go? How do our institutions, whether they're governmental or otherwise, how do they react to that, and what steps do we start taking as a community to deal with that? I mean, that's a tough question. I know that's, you know, no one's got the crystal ball, but I think this is what we need to wrestle with, don't we, as we're moving forward on a daily basis here.
And I think that's part of the chrysalis stage, Gary. I mean, I don't mean to deflect your question because it's so critical, but at the same time, if my hypothesis is correct, that, well, I know the data were very clearly showing that all of our traditional taxable sales generating businesses were slowing down. And the couple of months of data that I've gotten suggests that could catalyze the slowdown. So let's take that idea and park it for a second. Then let's take a look at how the income mix of our community has changed over the last couple of decades. You know, as you know, we have the greatest income inequality of any county in America. And the reason we have that, there's something on the top and there's something on the bottom. The something on the top is that depending on the year, we get roughly 85%, 80 to 85% of all of our income is from investments. And so
what you're saying, just to be clear, when people file their tax returns from Teton County, 85% of the revenue income on those tax returns, it's not wages, it's not
pensions, it's either pensions, wages, or investments. Pensions and wages take up about 20%.
Got it.
And so this is anybody who claims Teton County for their residence. And you know, 20 years ago, it was a much different mix. It was much more wage dependent, but we have the highest percentage of investment income as a percentage of all income of any county in America.
Yep.
At the bottom end, depending on how you count it, but let's say for sake of argument, the jobs in retail, lodging, and restaurants and recreation, if you take those four categories, let's call those tourism-oriented jobs. roughly 40% of all of our jobs are in those four categories, which ranks us about, depending on the year, somewhere between 5th and 10th out of 3,100 plus counties in America. So we're in the top 0.5% in terms of our percentage of tourism-oriented jobs.
Right.
And those jobs, by definition, pay low wages. That's just
Right.
baked into their model. So again, the wage distribution or the income distribution, the reason is because we have more investment income than any proportion than any other county. Plus, we are right up there with communities like Las Vegas in terms of our dependence on tourism jobs.
Right.
So,
go ahead. Sorry.
No, it's just, so then that's just adding increasing tension, because the only way that you can continue that reliance on tourism for the tourism economy to work, you need a lot of workers. You need to be able to house them. You need to be able to move them around at different hours. And so all of these different issues that have been playing out very strongly, I think are only going to get accelerated by what we're going through right now, our metamorphosis stage, because I've talked to some friends of mine who are in the real estate business. They're starting, apparently there's a national trend, and we're not immune from it, of people with a lot of money are looking to move away from cities.
Yep.
And move toward less densely populated places. And
sorry.
And we've got, we've got all the tax reasons in the world for people to be coming here.
Right.
So if you take all those things, get into Silicon Couloir.
There's a couple of questions I want to get to, but it reminds me of a stat. I may have mentioned it that I think I've seen before, and you probably know it better than me. But if you remove the top, we have the highest per capita income of any county in the country, along with the greatest inequality. But if you remove the top, I believe it's 10 or 15% of those earners, the remaining 85% of earners were below the median in terms of wages and earnings in the state of Wyoming for sure, and perhaps in the country. So that just again reinforces that inequality component, where the vast majority of our workers are earning below the median, and we've got a small percentage earning above.
Yeah, I mean, only 15 to 18% of all of our income comes from wages. And then when you slice out a big 40% of the jobs, but only about 30% of the wages come from tourism related things. And so I think it's going to be a situation where our traditional tourism oriented businesses are going to have a harder and harder time making it. And what's happening with COVID certainly isn't helping.
Right.
But the kind of things that Silicon Couloir is looking at in terms of 21st century businesses, if you will, or ones that are sort of stepping into the future, I think you have a real opportunity, but also arguably an obligation, you as the director, you as your board, you as your organization, to assume a larger, more vital role in the community's thinking, because I think you're going to be seeing the growth trends are going to be favoring the kind of businesses that are the folks who are showing up at chance meetings, the folks who are going through Sandy Hessler's courses, things like that.
Well, thanks for placing that obligation and burden on us. We appreciate that.
It's my gift.
There are a couple questions I want to get to. First question. So, Jonathan, and you're on the spot here because you're a town councilor, you're an elected official, but you're the only one who's kind of doing things like this. So maybe not the only one, but the question is, are you saying that we need a services tax? And can we do that as a county levy, or does Cheyenne have to join in on that type of legislation?
By design, local government has very few powers in Wyoming. And so Teton County, roughly speaking, the county government gets about 50, in a traditional year, they would get about 50% of their revenue from sales tax, 25% from property tax, and 25% from everything else. Because sales tax is likely going to go down, property tax is likely going to go up. It's going to be more like a third, a third, a third. But and the town doesn't levy a property tax, which is why we're more heavily dependent upon sales taxes, but we don't have the legal ability to really tap into anything more than
What you've already got.
what we've already got. We're more heavily, the town of Jackson, and I think Teton County, but certainly the town of Jackson is more dependent upon sales taxes than the state of Wyoming is upon hydrocarbons or mining in general, which is crazy.
That's
but that's our reality. And so my hope is that this will be a giant wake-up call to the legislature, the kind of financial difficulties the state is going to be facing. The state, it may be entering the 21st century kicking and screaming and or maybe even the 1980s, but it too has a big disconnect between where its income is coming from. So as part of that reexamination, I would hope that they would start looking at the kinds of things that are actually going on in the state today and give us more power at the local level. But right now, we don't have the ability to do anything except either, as the town, we can either put in a property tax or we can ask the voters for a 7-cent sales tax, which we're going to be doing this November.
But that's about it. And I'm sure, I know you've seen it, Jonathan, but for those folks that are watching, the Consensus Revenue Estimating Group at the state of Wyoming came up with an estimate of a potentially $1.5 billion loss of revenue by 2022, which I believe is larger than our annual budget for the state of Wyoming in any given year. So yeah, we've got some hard work to do. And I think for everybody watching, this is why being an active participant in public policy matters, right? Because we do need to be dragged kicking and screaming into looking at how things are changing. Next question. Do you see an important role for thoughtful public-private partnerships to fund some town and county official needs? I guess whether that's services or other things. Have you guys talked about that? Or is that something that you see as viable, not viable? Do you think it's something that we should be pursuing? What are your thoughts on that?
So the town of Jackson, for budgeting purposes, is estimating a 50% drop in taxable sales and lodging tax. And when you work that through the system, it works out to be about a 45% cut, 40 to 45% cut in all of our revenues. And certain things are going to be in better shape. Water and sewer, they're their own standalone funds. And so they aren't as subject to the vicissitudes of sales tax. But in the same way, to me, it doesn't really matter if you're a business, a nonprofit, or a government. If what's going on in our world right now is not inspiring you to be creative, then I would be seriously concerned about your ability to survive. So it really doesn't matter who you are or what you are, what sector of the economy you're playing in. It's just a difficult, challenging time. And, we are a creative species, we are a creative country, we are a creative community. And so any kind of idea that came along, I think it would be madness to not at least, give it at least a smell test. And if it looks good and it seems to address the problem at hand, then that's really important.
Right. So let me go to the next question. I'm sorry, I'm just going to scroll down here real quickly.
I thought you were just showing off your really cool hoodie there.
No, that's my branded hoodie. I don't have it all on the screen, so I'm trying to find it. Okay, so so someone asked can you opine on the effect that the declining local economy and resulting lower employment base might have an affordable housing need? So if the move away, or at least if the move towards e-commerce and less bricks and mortar puts pressure on local businesses here, what might that mean from the perspective of housing?
The most disconcerting thing I've heard in the last few weeks, I was talking to one of my neighbors who's a realtor, and he was talking about how we were just talking about the shift in the real estate market over the last few years. And he was talking about how homes in Melody Ranch and Rafter J and Cottonwood are being bought as second homes. And that is certainly, when those subdivisions were laid out, nobody ever thought of them in terms of being second homes. And so I think there's going to be some real tension, because as in the same way that we're a 21st century community with a 20th century operating system, the businesses that we have traditionally relied on, and I can't emphasize this too much, I'm not at all condemning, I'm celebrating the tourism related businesses, because they add great vitality to the community. They give back. They are struggling really hard right now, and they are absolutely integral to our character. But they are also operating with some really tough headwinds, not just politically, but not just economically, but technologically and in other fashions.
Right.
It's going to become increasingly challenging for them in a bunch of different ways. And if I'm following the thought process of the question properly, what we saw after the 2008-2009 recession was there were a lot of people who were forced out of the valley, and it was even more so in Star Valley and in Idaho, because they couldn't afford their mortgage anymore. Is this going to have a kind of quick recovery, or is this going to have that same kind of 2, 3, 4 year effect where it's going to make it harder on those who are working stiffs, who are earning their paychecks here, as opposed to who are earning their paychecks on location neutral businesses? That's the fundamental unknown. But I'm anxious that that may be the case, that one thing that will happen as we emerge from this is that more and more well-to-do people will come in here to get away from big cities, or they'll start making a 5-year plan that they want to get out of here, of a big city, in the next 5 years, and they will scoop up more and more of the housing that right now is housing our middle class, is housing our working class, is housing people who've lived here for a long time and make huge contributions to the community. Those are the folks who I think are going to be in a vulnerable place. And if we lose that housing stock to second homes, or if we lose it to people who have got location neutral businesses or something like that, I don't see how it comes back to the traditional occupant who's working in a traditional bricks and mortar tourism oriented business.
And doesn't it, and someone made a comment, and I think it's perceptive that, and I want to switch gears after that for a sec, but we've got, first of all, I've lived in my neighborhood for 30 years, and it was the same thing, Jonathan. It was all single family, full-time homeowners when we came in here, Terry and I, 30 years ago, and I would argue that 80% of the single family homes in where I live are now short-term rentals on Airbnb. Our neighborhood's changed completely. Everybody came here for Halloween 30 years ago, and nobody comes here anymore because nobody lives here full-time in my neighborhood. It's really kind of interesting.
You get the candy?
What's that?
You eat the candy?
Sadly, I eat most of the candy. So what, and the other thing is that we've got this sort of aging workforce, right? We've got first responders, whether they're hospital, EMS, police, et cetera, that have sort of been aging over time. And we're going to have to deal with younger folks coming in to take some of those positions. And from a housing perspective, that's going to put even more pressure on, I believe, would it not?
Oh God, yeah. No, it's, and then you start looking at, um, for example, if you look at the people who work for the town of Jackson or Teton County government, one of the reasons that both governments work so well is that you have a lot of smart, dedicated people who've got a lot of experience. But to your point, they're going to be aging out and they're going to want to retire. Um, when they do, where will they live?
Right.
And because it's not like they will retire and move away because they want to retire and take advantage of this place that they've given so much to.
Yep.
So where do you find the replacement for a water and sewer or a sewer plant operator who's really, really good? Or, if you're Kevin Olson at the newspaper and you've got somebody who's been working on your printing press for 30 years, where do you find a replacement for that? Where's that person going to live? What's the housing going to cost? And so the wages have to ratchet up and it starts playing havoc with business models.
Yeah. Are there other communities out there that we can look to? I mean, I think my guess is probably not really, but that have been able to solve that sort of housing turnover from, primary homes to second homes, even in communities and developments that were built as primary home developments? Or are we kind of flying blind along with the rest of the resort communities that might be out there around the country at this point?
Well, you have to remember, if you go back and you think about how just the nature of vacationing in Jackson Hole has changed, even during the time you've been here, where people would book a ski vacation, say, well in advance, or a dude ranch vacation, and you'd go out for a couple of weeks, or you do a week of skiing, and you just lock things in. And now it's so much easier to say, oh, well, you know what, they had great snow at Steamboat last week, or they're supposed to get snow at Steamboat this weekend, but not at Jackson Hole, so I'm going to go to Steamboat. And the liberating quality of technology is
Right.
wreaking. It's changing so much more rapidly than the fixed nature of housing and how it's used. And so it's not only do people not have answers to these problems, to your question, but these were problems that really weren't even anticipated, say 10, 15 years ago.
Right. Let's switch gears for a sec. And I might be way off on this, so I please want you to correct me if that's the case. But one of my concerns, our health community, our healthcare community, and our first responders, and the community in general has done an amazing job regarding COVID. I mean, I think I could be wrong on this, but I don't think we have any cases in our hospital right now. I don't know that we even have that many new positive cases at all. I know that the hospital has been doing antibody testing, and like one person in the hospital that they've tested out of 112 people tested positive so far. And the hospital has also done PCR testing for the virus, whether the people are actually infected or not, and they have no infections among 200 some odd of their staff. I mean, we've done a great job in our community of getting this thing back down to almost zero. And yet I look at the statistics that you showed from the sales tax perspective, and notwithstanding retail sales and construction, we are down 40% or so for the last couple of months, maybe 40% plus. And it seems to me that if we have a 40% reduction in visitations, and we have roughly 1.5 to 2 million discrete visitations per summer, we're still going to have hundreds of thousands, if not a million people coming here over the course of the summer, even if we're down 40 to 50%. And yet being down 40 to 50% will make it very difficult for many of our businesses, small businesses, to survive. I don't know many small businesses that can take a 40 to 50% revenue hit on the top line and maintain their bottom line. How do we deal with that? Is that something, I mean, obviously the Economic Recovery Task Force, full disclosure, I'm on that task force, has done a great job of working really hard along with the Public Health Department to try and safely get things back to a new normal. But is that enough? And if it's not enough, where do we need to focus? So I worry we're going to get the infection. We're going to get a spike from the visitors.
We're going to get all the downside and none of the upside.
Right.
Metaphorically, Gary, the way that I've come to see the world, our community, everything in between in this period of COVID, it's like being in a vice, and the vice is slowly getting tightened every day, and it's exposing cracks and fissures and sometimes chasms in individuals, in communities. And for some of us, it's bringing out the best, and for others, it's bringing out the less than best. And I mention that because we don't have there are no answers at this point. But what I'm thoroughly convinced of is that if we are going to get through this collectively, then qualities of empathy, qualities of understanding, qualities of comity, qualities of sharing information, sharing data, listening well, and being ultra sensitive to each other's situation, the more that we can embody and practice those qualities, the better we as a community are going to get through this. You know, we talked for almost 2 hours at the town council meeting on Monday about how are we going to help the business community get through this? How are we as a community going to reopen? The thing that we can't control, and ultimately the thing that is going to drive so much of this, is fear. Are people afraid to travel? Are they comfortable traveling? We can do everything, but it's like a sense of humor or a sense of beauty. You can't talk somebody into not being afraid. And so I'm given that the best we can do is try to be empathetic to each other and work with each other in any way we possibly can. Gavin Fine made public comment. He said that he's budgeting for a 70% drop in revenue this summer, which, he thinks he can survive it. And God, I hope he does, both as a human and what he does professionally. I so admire and love the man. But
not many businesses can do that.
Yeah, a lot of businesses can't do that. And
right.
So what can we do collectively? What can we as government? We can play a role, but only a small role, because can we take a 50% revenue hit? It's going to be hard. We're going to have to dip into our reserves big time to get through it. So I don't have an answer for you, but I do know that the qualities that we manifest as individuals and as a community are going to dictate the grace or lack thereof we get through it.
So we've got, that third sector, which is the nonprofit sector, which we haven't really talked about. And organizations like the Community Foundation of Jackson Hole, with their emergency response fund, I think they've raised maybe over 3.5 mil at this point. I might be behind the curve, even a little more than that. And then 122, who's done an incredible job in helping those that have the least among us to be able to pay their rent and survive with direct grants. That's great, but that's not sustainable for the long haul, would be my guess, in terms of maintaining a vibrant economy and a dynamic, community, and also protecting all of the things about this community that we find so special, right? The natural resources, et cetera. So, I understand that there's no answer right this second, and that we're all feeling our way, but I think I agree with you that it's a matter of all three of those institutions, right? Public, private, and nonprofit, finding ways to work together to find their niches, to find out where all of us can add the most value and be successful at maintaining, what we are. Well, go ahead. Sorry, I don't know if you have a response to that, but yeah.
The positive, again, I see us as being inside this chrysalis, but the opportunity, if we're going to emerge as the beautiful butterfly that we can emerge as, it's going to be because we've all given our best. We've all tapped into that, the same energy, the same passion that drew us all here. Very few of us live here because we have to.
Right.
We all came here because there was something about the place that brought us in and inspired us. And if we can somehow tap into that energy and harness it, that's what's going to get us through collectively as a community. There are going to be some people who have a hard time. Some people are going to lose their businesses. Some people are going to lose their homes. But the more empathetic and the more that we can try to work together, the better we're all going to come through. Of that, I'm convinced. The
Right.
rest of it is so mysterious.
So we're getting close to the end of the hour. We'd love more questions, but we want to respect everybody's time. When you published the results of your survey in the paper, when the paper published it, I looked at some of the comments online, and some of them thought that your survey was maybe not the most useful thing in the world. Let's just put it that way, kindly. But I do think that clearly crowdsourcing the zeitgeist and the feeling of the community with enough responses to be statistically significant, of course, has great value. So do you have any plans on going with a third survey or more to try and continue to see how attitudes match with reality, and perception can be reality and can create it in some ways in our community? And what are your plans going forward on that?
Yeah, I do want to do another survey, and I don't know if it's going to be it's not going to be as long, and it's not going to be as oriented toward making the crowdsourcing guess. But I think, and it's why I mentioned going from that 14% to the 20% plus of reductions in income and savings. It gives a sense of the community, and I think that's really important to know in terms of that I can rely on. I've never, I have to laugh at some of those comments. And again, there's angst that's pouring out. I get dozens of emails in my town council role. I respond to everyone because there's a lot of angst out there and people just want to be heard. And I think it's really, this crowdsourcing is not statistically significant. It's just a best guess. And if it
Right.
works out, how great would that be? Because then we would have a predictive tool that we could count on. But if it doesn't, so be it. But if people are saying, I'm more anxious this month than I am about my income and about my expenditures than I was last month, or if it turns around, then I think that tells us something we need to know about the community.
Right. That's great. Any parting thoughts that you want to give the crowd and the gang before we allow them to get to dinner and biking and whatever recreational pursuits everybody wants to get to?
Sure. A couple things. One is the slides. I will be posting them on my js4jh.com website.
Great.
And if anybody wants to subscribe to the newsletter, the e-newsletter, please have them get in touch with me, or they could get in touch with you, and please forward those names on. It's free to subscribe, and I'll be sharing those slides. I'm going to try to get out in the next 24 hours. The other thing I wanted to do is I would be remiss to not mention just the horror of Minneapolis. And in particular, the reason I want to mention that is because we are in a bubble, but we have people who are of color, and we have people who are struggling, and people who feel alienated. I think one of the great blessings of this community is I work on a regular basis with Todd Smith, the chief of police of the town of Jackson, and he and I were talking over the weekend, and he was trying to figure out what he could do, he and his colleagues in law enforcement, to help meet this, because it just pissed him off that somebody would stain his profession the way that his profession has been stained. So to his credit, I suggested to him that maybe he could do some sort of community forum. So I just wanted to let people know that tomorrow between 12 and 1 at the town hall in the council chambers, Chief Todd, Sheriff Matt Carr, the local head of the Wyoming Highway Patrol, and the fellow who is the head of law enforcement in Grand Teton National Park are going to be holding a brown bag lunch where they're going to be talking about this, taking questions, and just trying to meet this head on and talk about people's concerns and do a lot of listening. And it will be streamed live on the Town of Jackson's. You can go to the Town of Jackson's website, and our our streaming service will carry it. So I just wanted to do that because my hat's off to Todd, because he's stepping into it and he's willing to listen to anybody who wants to talk to him because he's that upset about it.
Thank you for mentioning that, Jonathan. You know, I know Todd and I know Matt at the sheriff's office as well, and they're good folks. And you know, I appreciate your mentioning this. I've already talked about it with a few people in my organization because we're a 501c3. We have you know, the reason that we are tax exempt is because we are performing on behalf of the community. We serve the community. And while our mission as Silicon Couloir is clearly not in the realm of what happened in Minneapolis and dealing with that in some ways, I do feel that even though that's not our primary mission as an organization that's formed for the public good, we all have a role to play. And I guess that would go into my close, which would simply be that to your point about 21st century community with 20th century operating system. Thank you. Of course, I forgot. And to your last point about what's been taking place in this country over the last several days after Minneapolis, you know, participating matters. I will tell you that I've never personally been so proud as to see a picture of my 20-year-old son in the gallery in the News and Guide holding a sign that says something along the lines of silence is complicity, and being out with the folks on the square the other day, because we all have a role to play, whether it's Minneapolis or making sure that our community gets through the tough time of COVID, or that we just change our public policies to make sure that we can thrive as a state, as a community, as a country. The only way that works is with people being active and making sure that they have a voice. And it seems hard to have a voice sometimes, but I think individuals get together and can amplify themselves and get louder and louder. So I would recommend that. I appreciate your willingness to come on and do this on a one-on-one basis. It's not always easy and not always something that people are willing to do, put themselves out there. So kudos to you for doing that. I hope we can keep doing this in the future and get other people to come on and do these type of things. And so we can hear voices that aren't the voices that we maybe normally hear in the community going forward. So thank you. We've tried to get to everybody's questions. I may have missed one or two or misconstrued the question. If I did, I apologize. If you still want an answer, I will make sure to get with me and I'll ask it of Jonathan in an email. We'll get an answer back to you. But thank you everybody for showing up. This is being recorded. It will be on the website of Silicon Couloir in our video section, our content section. So you can replay it and tell your friends and peers if they want to listen to it. And we'll see you again soon, Jonathan, and everybody else for showing up. Thanks a lot.
Deepest thanks to everybody, Gary.
You bet. Thanks for coming on. Thanks, everybody. Have a great evening.